Welcome back to Via the Source, where you can get news about the entire NFL and, of course, the Miami Dolphins. Fins up, here's Steven, your host.
What is up, guys? Today's date is November the 6th. I'm Steven Mosso, and as always, you are listening to Via the Source. In today's episode, I'm going to be going over this week's recap, each game around the NFL. Of course, if you wanted to hear just the Dolphins one, that is uploaded on the last podcast right before this one. I have my whole recap. I go in depth. I have my takeaways. If you want to hear that, that was between the Jets and the Miami Dolphins from this week. This one, I'm just going to be touching on a little bit of each game around the NFL. And as you guys know, last week was the first time I tried doing my predictions for each game and giving my winner and my loser. So it is only right that I say how I did. This is something that some weeks is going to make me look really good, and then other weeks I'm going to probably lose all credibility because it's sometimes hard to predict games in the NFL. Well, this week I went 8-2. Very proud to say that, 8-2. And the games that I did get wrong were the Saints beating the Rams. I thought the Rams were going to do it. And then the Titans, I think, shocked a lot of people, beating the Cowboys on Monday night. Of course, the Cowboys aren't amazing, but that's a home game for them on primetime. It was a little shocking to me to see the Titans go in there and dominate the second half of that game, and they came out looking strong. So, yeah, this week, I think it's fair to say I did pretty good. Hopefully you guys agree with that. 8-2, not too bad. But I will say, I think there were a lot of games that were really easy to predict given the matchup. Like the Bears and the Bills, come on. The Chiefs and the Browns, it doesn't get much easier than that. So, I will say this was a pretty easy week in terms of the predictions. But let's just go over the quick recap of the games. The first one I'm going to talk about is the Falcons versus the Redskins. The Falcons won 38-14. Matt Ryan is just on an absolute tear right now. He is leading a very, very fiery offense in Atlanta right now. Matt Ryan, through his last 6 games, 350 yards, 379, 355, 285, 419, and 374. Through that span, he has 17 touchdowns and 1 interception. On the whole season, he has 19 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. So he is just on an absolute tear. That offense is amazing. Julio Jones got his first TD, as we all know, also over 100 yards. Calvin Ridley, just such an explosive talent. I am so happy for them that they went out and they got him. It was kind of a shocker because they were a team that are regarded to always have a good offense, and they kind of doubled down on it by drafting him. Well, he looked amazing again, getting another touchdown, a big run from Calvin Ridley, and then Tevin Coleman, 156 total yards and 2 touchdowns. And of course, he's filling in for Devontae Freeman, but he is looking very good as well. He will be a free agent, so it is very interesting to speculate where he might be going. Will he stay there? I think he may end up in Houston. That's my very early guess that he ends up a Houston Texan. And then from the Redskins side, a pretty good offensive battle for them. Over 300 yards passing from Alex Smith. Paul Richardson, though, he is out for the year. And the Redskins right now are just getting torn apart by injury. So I think it is fair to say that their season, it is looking more bleak. And it's really a shame because you look at the state that the Cowboys are in. And then, of course, the New York Giants they just keep falling apart. So the Eagles were the only real contenders. And the Eagles are not the same Eagles they were last year. So that was really, an open door, and then they just got destroyed by injuries this week, which is a very darn shame. Adrian Peterson, who was looking great in weeks past, struggled this week, averaging only 1.9 yards per carry. Now we move on to the Bears versus the Buffalo Bills. The Bears absolutely destroyed them 41-9. The Bears defense were responsible for 2 of the defensive touchdowns. They had 3 picks, and they also got a fumble recovery. And man, the Bears offense had 190 total yards, and they got 41 points. That is unheard of, getting that few yards and putting up that kind of numbers in the point column. And honestly, why is Nathan Peterman in the league at this point? I have no idea. There is a certain someone, and I know it's a very controversial topic, certain someone who made some political statements, took a knee, and he is not in the league. And yet Nathan Peterman is somehow in the league. That doesn't make any sense to me. His level of play has been so bad that it is just unexcusable. I cannot see this team, the Buffalo Bills, even getting close to winning a game as long as he is a quarterback. And then LaShawn McCoy, 10 carries for 10 yards. As a guy who would own him in fantasy football, you have to be devastated. That is not something you want to see out of your potential RB1. So yeah, just as an offense, the Bills are downright terrible this year. Then we move on to the Chiefs versus the Browns. The Chiefs won 37-21. Patrick Mahomes continues to dominate. 3 touchdowns, 375 passing yards. He did have an interception though, rare thing to see from him. Kareem Hunt also started picking up as of late. He had 3 touchdowns in this one, 141 total yards. And then Travis Kelce is just probably the most dominant tight end in the league right now. It's fair to say that I think he surpassed Gronk as of right now in terms of who is the best tight end. He finished this game 2 touchdowns, 99 yards receiving. And then it was another TD from Bradley Chubb. So that's a positive to see for the Cleveland Browns. They're clearly in a rebuild. Baker Mayfield is at least getting experience. He is throwing the ball around a lot for a rookie quarterback, which is pretty good to see. And the way he's holding up, I am impressed from a rookie standpoint. He is not having the kind of season that Patrick Mahomes is, but it is just good to see him. You know, it looks like the future is bright for Cleveland with Baker Mayfield in there. He makes some very beautiful throws. He puts some great zip on the ball, and his playmaking ability is tremendous. I give a nod of approval for Baker Mayfield as of right now. They didn't get the win, but you have to like what you see there. Then you move on to the Lions versus the Vikings. The Vikings dominated this one, winning 24-9. The Vikings defense held the Lions to 209 total yards, and the Lions only had 2.8 yards per rush. The Vikings defense also came away with a touchdown in this one. So it was really not much that was required of this Vikings offense and Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, in fact, only had 164 passing yards and an interception. So it was not a big game for this Vikings. Oh, Dalvin Cook did return. He had a big game, 10 carries for 89 yards. I would say he is a player of the game. He was on a snap count and still managed to have a massive impact in this one. Now we move on to the Steelers versus the Ravens. The Steelers won 23-16. First note, what is going to stop James Conner? I have no idea what is going to stop, because I looked at this matchup and I said, okay, I still think the Ravens are going to win, but this is the one where James Conner gets slowed down and he doesn't have this huge monster performance. Well, that was not the case. James Conner, again, 164 total yards and another touchdown. A big week for him. And, you know, the fantasy owners of James Conner can celebrate once more. And then when I just look at the Ravens, you know, I said their defense is respectable. I think they have a very good defense, but their offense, you can just tell that is not their strong suit. Joe Flacco, it's done for him. I think it's a wrap. I think his starting career is over, at least for a team that is striving for contention. I think that's done. And then they just have a huge running back by committee. Alex Collins, I don't think he's the guy. Buck Allen, I don't think he's the guy. Ty Montgomery's not the guy. I just think they are lacking star power on offense. And of course, you have Lamar Jackson, who eventually should take over the reins. But until then, I just do not see this offense being enough to put this team in contention. Maybe they could sneak in and steal a wild card spot, as they always do from someone, but I just do not see them as a real team right now, not even really close at this point. Then we move on to the Buccaneers versus the Panthers. The Panthers won 42-28. Originally, it was a blowout, but the Buccaneers scored 21 unanswered points. And the offense for the Panthers, they look efficient. They look like they're connecting on all cylinders. They are, again, running through Christian McCaffrey heavily, who in this game had 157 total yards and 2 touchdowns. Huge role for him. Curtis Samuel returned this week as well. He has his amazing playmaking ability. He is as shifty as they get, like Tyreek Hill. He had a huge game, 2 touchdowns for him. They were both kind of wacky plays, so I don't know if you can depend on him if you're thinking fantasy, but the playmaking ability is there. And then Greg Olsen, he looks healthy. He's a guy who's been struggling with a foot injury. You never know if he's just, if he's there or if he's not there, how they're going to use him if they're concerned. Well, this game, huge role, 76 yards, a touchdown. He looks to be fully healthy. And then the last point for this game is that, man, Ryan Fitzpatrick is a gunslinger. I will give him that. He is I don't think he's a long-term solution. I don't think he'll ever be a long-term solution, a guy that your team can depend on, because he looked pretty bad towards the beginning of this game. He finished well with 4 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. So I do see him as a guy that, at least for right now, the Buccaneers have to stick with. I don't think you can hand it back over to Winston. I think Winston's career in Tampa Bay is over, but at the same time, I don't know how you can depend on Ryan Fitzpatrick. Maybe they aim for that 2020 draft and hopefully get Tua, but I just, he is not going to be the guy to get you anywhere meaningful. I will say, though, O.J. Howard will be a top tight end in this league by next season, maybe by the end of this season. He recorded 2 touchdowns and 53 yards in this one. I do think by next season, he will be a top 3, top 5 tight end in this league, just because he's so big, he's so quick. He is like a receiver who is just massive. It is really impressive to see. We move on to the next game, the Texans versus the Broncos. The Texans won that game 19-17. It was the return of Demaryius Thomas, a potential revenge game. He didn't look too great, but he didn't look too bad. 61 yards receiving for him. It was, again, a DeAndre Hopkins type of game, 105 yards and a touchdown from Nuke. And then Deshaun Watson, he has looked incredibly efficient. They haven't been using him too much. They haven't needed him too much. He was 17 for 24, had 2 touchdowns, but the running backs for the Texans, again, they were really struggling, and you can tell they want to use them badly. But Lamar Miller, only 21 yards, 1.8 yards per carry. Alfred Blue, 39 yards, 2.6 yards a carry. That is just really bad. That's why I speculate that they get Tevin Coleman, because they need a running back in there very desperately. And then Case Keenum, he continues to put up solid numbers, I think. His completion percentage is not impressive, but he is managing to put up touchdowns, keep the turnovers to a minimum, and put up good passing numbers. I am very impressed kind of so far for what I see from Case Keenum. I put him in that same conversation as Ryan Fitzpatrick. I do not think he's the answer for any team. He is a good stop holder, though, and it was quite a performance by their tight end, Hewerman. He recorded 83 yards and a touchdown for him. It was a big game. One thing that surprised me was Cortland Sutton. I was expecting a huge game from him. That is not how it turned out. I will say that I do think it will get better for him in weeks ahead. Again, if you're thinking fantasy football, we move on to the Los Angeles Chargers against the Seattle Seahawks. Chargers won that one 25-17. The Chargers offense is looking really explosive. They had 113 yards from Melvin Gordon, another 124 from Keenan Allen, who is just the best route runner in the league. Maybe only Antonio Brown ahead of him, but I think Keenan Allen, if you just watch what he does with his feet, it is a work of art. The sharpest cuts ever. It is incredible. I highly recommend, even if you're not a Chargers fan. I am not a Chargers fan, but I love Keenan Allen because of how he runs routes. It is incredible. So it was another decent game offensively for the Seahawks. 154 yards rushing, 235 passing, but there was this costly pick six that I think was the difference maker in this one. I don't see the Seahawks as being that much of a real contender. I think they're relying too much on Russell Wilson. They're a similar situation as the Packers. You're giving him no help, and you're just expecting your elite quarterback to do all the work. So if he just had some help around him, they could be a real team. Until then, I don't think so. Next, we move on to the Rams versus the Saints. The Saints ended up winning this one 45-35. It was all Saints to begin the game, but the Rams were able to claw back in this one and make it close. It was an absolute shootout. Drew Brees finished with 346 yards and 4 touchdowns, and then Jared Goff on the other end, 391 yards passing, 3 touchdowns for him. Michael Thomas just had a huge monster game. He is really establishing himself as a top 5 at least receiver in this league. 211 yards and a touchdown. Of course, he had that big 77-yard reception where he went, grabbed the phone. It looked really cool. Twitter was having fun with it. And then Alvin Kamara, from a fantasy football perspective, is an absolute god right now. 116 total yards in this one. 3 touchdowns. No complaints if you own him in fantasy football. What a performance from him. And then the Saints were able to minimize Todd Gurley, 79 total yards, and to me, that is really, really good when it comes to Todd Gurley. In fact, from the receiving standpoint, Gurley only had 11 yards receiving on 6 catches, which is tremendous. If Todd Gurley gets 6 catches, you are expecting way more yards than that. And then the Rams continue spreading the wealth to their 3 receivers, Robert Woods, Cooper Kupp, and Brandon Cooks. It is very impressive to see. That is one of the most impressive trifectas of receivers that I have seen since the Peyton Manning year with Marvin Harrison, Reggie Wayne, and Brandon Stokely, because they're just all getting equally amount of yards on a week-to-week basis. It is very impressive. They're all going to finish with over 1,000 yards, more than likely. And then we move on to the Packers versus the Patriots. The Patriots ended up winning 31-17. This one I predicted would go the Patriots' way. The Patriots just don't lose at home. Brady finished this game with 294 yards and a touchdown. Cordero Patterson ended up taking over the rushing duty. Sony Michel was out for this game, and Cordero Patterson finished with 61 yards on 11 carries and a touchdown. So it was very impressive to see him. He's just a guy that if you can find a way to work him in there, he will be effective. And then Josh Gordon, a monster game from him, 135 yards. Of course, we all saw that 55-yard touchdown he had where he was wide open. I think it's safe to say that Josh Gordon will be the most effective receiver on this team. And then it was a decent game from the Packers offense. Valdez-Scantling stepped up big for the absence of Geronimo Allison, which will continue because Allison will have surgery, so he'll continue to miss time. But in this one, Valdez-Scantling had 101 yards receiving. There was a costly fumble, though, by Aaron Jones, which mostly sealed this game for the Patriots. And then we move on to the Monday night game between the Titans and the Cowboys. The Titans surprised at least me, winning this game 28-14. It was the arrival of Amari Cooper for the Dallas Cowboys. As I predicted, he ended up getting his first touchdown in this game. He ended up finishing the game, though, with only 58 yards receiving on 5 catches. Mariota, he looked pretty surgical in this game. He didn't put up huge numbers, but he really showed this playmaking ability, this quarterback IQ that enabled him to make some plays. We saw that option working well for him, something that he got to use well in Oregon, and he's just very creative with it. So I don't think he has the strongest arm. I don't think he makes the prettiest passes, but I think his ability to read a defense and just playmaking ability, it looked really sharp in this game. Deion Lewis had a huge game, 122 total yards and a touchdown, likely his biggest game of the season. And then the Cowboys defense, they looked really dominant at first. It seemed like every single play there was a fumble on the Titans side. But again, there was just no help from the offense. And I'm just at a point right now where if Zeke doesn't have a big 140 plus yard game, I just don't see the Cowboys winning. It seems like the only games they're going to win are if Zeke is the main focus and if he has a dominant performance. And that is my recap of these Week 9 games. Let me know what you think about that. And there are some kind of headlines that I want to discuss just around the league right now. The first one I'm going to discuss is the Steelers running back situation with LeVeon Bell. I predicted at the beginning of the season, I didn't think that LeVeon Bell would be a Steeler when the season started. I thought they were going to trade him or something was going to happen. So he's been holding out, and he tweeted this morning, because we all look very deeply into tweets now, "Farewell Miami." So some speculate that means it is his return to the Steelers. And honestly, we have to discuss, is that the right move for him? Because, of course, you're talking about Le'Veon Bell, a top 3, even maybe top 2, running back in this league. When he's out there, his numbers are on Todd Gurley's level. He is just that dominant from a receiving and running standpoint. He does everything. He was the main person in that offense for the past few years. So there's no doubting that he was one of the best. But now seeing how James Conner plays, I can't help but think that, is that all him, or is it the system also benefiting him? Because Conner is very well mimicking those numbers. They're almost identical to an extent. I do not think that James Conner is as good as Le'Veon Bell. I'm not saying that he can't ever be that good, but there's a bigger sample size to look at when you're looking at Le'Veon Bell. He's done it more consistently, and he's done it for a longer period of time. But then you also have to say, well, who's doing it right now? And who's doing it right now is James Conner. So do you bring him back? I can't help but think there will be some locker room turmoil, and I don't know if it's worth it. Because some players, I discussed it way back, one of the earlier episodes when I talked about Jarvis Landry, some players play for the check. And so they won't care if Le'Veon Bell comes in. They're all just coworkers. Le'Veon Bell could return. It would do nothing. Whoever's there playing the position, they're going to block the same way. They're going to play the same way. It doesn't matter. And I understand that. But then there's other players, the more kind of stereotypical, what you think of when you talk about a football player, that to them, it's a brotherhood. And they want the guys who've been rolling with them to be there. That's the guys they want to stand up for. That's their teammate. That's their brother. They've been there. So they don't want James Conner to just lose his role. They're going to be on James Conner's side. So I don't know if you want that turmoil of LeVeon Bell returning. I don't know if there's as much upside that it outweighs that potential for more locker room turmoil. And I know there are some people in the locker room, it may not be a huge number, but there has to be a few that do feel betrayed in a sense by what Le'Veon Bell does. But of course, like I said, there are guys who understand. They know it's a money thing. They know it's a business. I personally agree with Le'Veon Bell not playing. He deserves a big contract. I just don't think the Steelers should be the ones to give it to him. So I understand that from both sides, but I can say that I don't know if the locker room turmoil or the potential for it is outweighed by the benefit that Le'Veon Bell brings, especially when you see the productiveness that James Conner is having right now. I just think right now they should stick with James Conner. He is doing fine and just roll with that. And now the next topic I want to discuss is, the NFC South was for a few years there a kind of a division that everyone mocked, that it was kind of a shame that even one team from this division had to go into the playoffs because all their records were so bad. But now I think this is the most competitive division that I'm looking at. You have the Saints sitting at 7-1. You have the Panthers at 6-2, and the Falcons may be one of the best teams with the worst record, if that makes sense, because the Falcons are at 4-4, and they are way better than 4-4 in my opinion. So, and then the Buccaneers are there at 3-5. The Buccaneers are in no real shape or form a contender. You can just rule them out. All they will do is ruin a season for someone else because they can likely steal a win in a game where they shouldn't have won. That's how I look at the Buccaneers. So we rule them out. So now you're left with the Falcons, the Panthers, and the Saints. And after what the Saints just did, it is hard to argue against them. They are honestly probably my favorite to win this division just because of how they are rolling right now. Offensively, such a powerhouse. The defense was there last year. They are more up and down this year. I can't really say that I trust their defense much, but their offense is such a powerhouse that they are my favorites as of right now. But then the Carolina Panthers, like I said earlier, they've been just connecting on all cylinders. They have had a solid defense. Their offense is there. They're not making mistakes. They're rolling through Christian McCaffrey. But I just don't think the Panthers are a team that I can bet on consistently. I think a team, when they go up against them, they can find a way to shut out McCaffrey. And if you shut out McCaffrey, you basically shut out the Panthers. Because Devin Funchess isn't a guy who's going to dominate like Julio Jones and Michael Thomas is. So he is more easy to lock down. And then the other receivers, DJ Moore, he shows that he can be up and down. He's a rookie. I wouldn't rely on him too much. Greg Olson's getting up there in age. I just do not trust the Panthers' offense enough to be a real contender in this one. Like I said, they're looking great. But if I had to bet on somebody in this division, it is the Saints. And then in second place, I would go actually with the Atlanta Falcons over the Carolina Panthers just because this is honestly, I think, a team that could beat the Saints. I think they are better offensively than the Saints are. And it is not by a huge margin, but it's hard to stop everyone that the Falcons have. If you look at them on paper, they're absolutely dominant. Tevin Coleman is just having a really impressive year. And then there is a possibility that Devontae Freeman could return in Week 16 if they're in any shape or form near a playoff spot. So that has to be considered too. Julio Jones and Calvin Ridley are just unmatched in talent. I look at the Saints, Michael Thomas, Julio Jones. Okay, maybe I'd still give Julio Jones a slight edge, but let's say those balance out. But then you look elsewhere on the Saints roster. I don't believe in Traquan Smith like that. Cameron Meredith is hurt, and Ted Ginn's hurt. I just don't know who else to trust besides Michael Thomas on the Saints receiving core. Whereas the Falcons have Calvin Ridley, a guy who is extremely explosive, and Mohamed Sanu, who is vastly underrated year in and year out. He continues to put up numbers, and he doesn't get any type of respect. And I just think that I have to give a slight edge to the Falcons on that one just because their offense, to me on paper, it is just unstoppable. So again, I have the Saints at number 1. I have the Falcons at number 2, despite them being lower than the Panthers in the record. I have the Panthers at number 3 just because I don't know how consistent they are. And then the Buccaneers are not a real team. That is how I see the NFC South unfolding. So let me know what you guys think. As always, I will never bash anyone for their opinion. I like to keep it just a calm, open discussion. My pet peeve, again, is when people start attacking other people's intelligence, stuff like that, just because they have a different opinion in something sport related. I like to keep it calm. It's an open discussion. It's all entertainment at the end of the day. So let me know what you guys think. You can follow me on Twitter at ShadySteven, at Via the Source. Until next time, though, I'm Steven Mosso, and you were listening to Via the Source.